Have you ever wondered what happened to the forgotten superheroes of Saturday mornings? Before Marvel ruled theaters and DC conquered TV, Hanna-Barbera created a universe of masked crusaders that defied logic and time. They weren't just cartoons, they were experiments in power, paranoia, and prophecy. Yet they vanished quietly. Today, we dig into 12 Hanna-Barbera superhero shows that were decades ahead of their time. Number 12. The Herculoids, 1967. The Herculoids wasn't just another sci-fi adventure. It was a surreal fusion of primal nature and futuristic warfare. Viewers met Xandor Terra and their son Dorno defending the planet Quasar with the help of living weapons, creatures made of stone slime and laser energy. At first glance, it looked like a children's fantasy. But beneath the surface, it was a warning about evolution and survival. Created during the height of the space race, the show imagined what humanity might become if technology fused with biology. Some critics accused it of being too violent for kids. Others found its tone too dark. Parents complained about the eerie creatures and constant battles. Broadcast censors demanded that some laser effects and creature screams be toned down to avoid frightening younger viewers. Behind the scenes, animators pushed the limits of limited TV budgets by crafting fluid action sequences using recycled frames from previous series. The show's alien landscapes were inspired by abstract art and pulp sci-fi book covers. Despite network hesitation, it aired on CBS and quickly became a cult phenomenon among teens who saw it as symbolic rebellion against conformity. By the early 70s, reruns disappeared without explanation. Rumors suggested licensing disputes and nervous advertisers. Decades later, its DNA resurfaced in projects like Samurai Jack and Primal. The Herculoids remains an unspoken ancestor of posthuman storytelling, an echo from a wilder, stranger imagination. Number 11. Space Ghost, 1966. Before Batman had his animated renaissance, there was Space Ghost, a mysterious intergalactic lawman with a voice as commanding as thunder. The series presented him as part detective, part demigod, wielding power bands that shot beams of energy across the galaxy. Each episode fused pulp noir with cosmic justice. Space Ghost was Hanna-Barbera's attempt to capture the Cold War zeitgeist. He was a symbol of order in a universe ruled by chaos. Yet critics found him too grim for Saturday mornings. His villains were grotesque mutants and warlords' metaphors for nuclear anxiety and mistrust of authority. Some television affiliates refused to air certain episodes featuring darker visual imagery and implied death scenes. Behind the scenes, the show's tone divided the creative team. Alex Toth's minimalist designs emphasized sleek heroism, while network executives pushed for lighter comedy. The tension resulted in a unique atmosphere, half radio serial, half surreal poem. Its haunting soundtrack scored with primitive synths and brass gave it a chilling edge that later inspired Adult Swim's revival. When reruns were canceled in the early 70s, fans assumed Space Ghost had burned out like a dying star. But decades later, the character returned, mocking his own legacy as a late-night talk show host. Beneath the parody, though, the original remains one of animation's most haunting relics, a cosmic guardian whose silence speaks louder than words. Number 10. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, 1967. Birdman was not born in a comic book. He was forged in sunlight, literally. A winged avenger who drew strength from the sun's rays, his show was both triumphant and tragic. When he fought too long in darkness, his powers faded, leaving him human and vulnerable. It was a poetic metaphor for burnout, a theme decades ahead of its time. The Galaxy Trio complemented his adventures with stories of cosmic teamwork featuring Vapor Man, Gravity Girl, and Meteor Man. Together they symbolized unity and diversity among the stars. Yet network censors frequently clashed with producers over depictions of death and radiation. The idea of a hero weakened by the absence of sunlight was seen as morbid and possibly unsettling for children. Behind the curtain, the show struggled against network cuts and low funding. Animators reused cells across episodes, creating strange moments where backgrounds looped endlessly adding a dreamlike quality that would later influence avant-garde animators. Critics dismissed it as cheap, but fans saw art in its limitations. When the series faded from airwaves, Birdman's legend only grew. Decades later, Adult Swim reimagined him as an exhausted lawyer defending cartoon icons, a tragicomic reflection of the very fatigue his original story foreshadowed. In hindsight, Birdman was never just a superhero. He was a symbol of light, fading in a world that forgot how to look up. Number 9. Mighty Mightor, 1967. Long before the age of caped billionaires, there was Mightor, the prehistoric superhero who ruled the skies of an ancient world. At first glance, he seemed simple, a caveman who gained godlike strength from a magic club. But deep down, the show carried a strange duality. Mightor was both protector and destroyer, a primitive symbol of power misunderstood. Mightor began as a Saturday morning adventure for children, yet its themes were darker than expected. The hero's transformation sequence, bathed in lightning and primal roars, frightened some younger viewers. Religious groups objected to the mystical elements, claiming they glamorized paganism and witchcraft. Several local stations refused to air certain episodes, believing the depiction of ancient gods was inappropriate. Behind the scenes, the creative process was chaotic. The studio worked under brutal time limits using storyboards recycled from other Hanna-Barbera shows. Animators struggled to maintain consistency in Mightor's massive physique, while the network demanded the violence be toned down. One storyboard artist even recalled an entire episode being shelved after a producer found it too brutal for Saturday television. Despite its short run, the show left a subtle mark. It predicted the mythic tone that would later define Conan the Barbarian and He-Man. Mightor's raw simplicity spoke to something primal buried deep in human memory. When reruns disappeared by the early 70s, the legend of the caveman hero faded too. Yet whispers of his power echo in every animated warrior who ever lifted a weapon toward the sky. Number 8. Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles, 1966. Few shows captured the spirit of 60s experimentation like Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles. It was a bizarre mix of science fiction comedy and pop culture satire. Frankenstein Jr. was a towering robot operated by a teenage genius, Buzz Conroy, while the Impossibles were a rock band who doubled as superheroes. The tone swung wildly between camp and chaos. The show premiered at a time when television networks feared growing concerns over cartoon violence. Parents' groups condemned Frankenstein Jr.'s laser battles and explosions, arguing they encouraged children to mimic dangerous behavior. Hanna-Barbera reluctantly edited out several action sequences for reruns, leading to awkward scene jumps and lost story beats. Behind the curtain, the studio was exhausted. Animators were juggling multiple superhero projects, at once creating a production crunch that forced reuse of designs from Space Ghost and Birdman. Music cues were recycled across different series, giving the show its odd, overlapping atmosphere. Despite the chaos, the series gained a loyal fan base that adored its absurd humor and stylized action. The Impossibles themselves became a cultural curiosity, decades later, inspiring parodies in shows like Dexter's Laboratory. Some even call them proto-superheroes of pop culture, the first to blend music with masked heroics. Today, the show stands as an early experiment in genre fusion, a forgotten milestone that dared to mix comedy technology and rebellion long before the mainstream ever caught up. Number 7. The Galaxy Goof-Ups, 1978. By the late 70s, Hanna-Barbera had moved far from its original edge, yet the Galaxy Goof-Ups was something unexpected, a cosmic blend of humor, adventure, and underlying melancholy. It followed Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound as bumbling space cops, but beneath the slapstick was a quiet reflection on burnout and bureaucracy in a rapidly changing world. The show appeared lighthearted, but its setting was a mirror of societal exhaustion. Space stations were sterile, and overregulated heroes were tired and misunderstood. Audiences laughed at the clumsiness, but adults sensed the satire. Some critics noted that the show mocked corporate systems and government inefficiency, under the disguise of cartoon antics. Internally, the production was troubled. Ratings were unstable. Networks complained it was too weird for kids and too childish for adults. Hanna-Barbera executives pressured the writers to inject more gags and tone down political undertones. Voice actors recalled long studio sessions where the direction kept changing to please sponsors. Despite the confusion, the Galaxy Goof-Ups developed a strange cult following among animation historians. It was the beginning of self-aware cartoon storytelling where heroes were flawed and disillusioned. Though forgotten by the 80s, it quietly influenced the tone of future animated satires. What looked like nonsense was actually prophecy. The laughter of lost heroes floating endlessly in space. Number 6. Shazzan, 1967. Before superheroes ruled the cosmos, there was Shazzan, the colossal genie of the mystic ring. The show followed teenage twins Chuck and Nancy, who discovered two halves of a magic ring that, when joined, summoned Shazzan, a thunderous guardian from another realm. On paper, it was simple adventure fare, but in spirit, it was pure surrealism. Shazzan was unlike any other Hanna-Barbera creation. Instead of cold futurism, it channeled ancient myth. Flying camels, desert cities, and portals between dimensions filled every frame. But its wild imagination came at a cost. Some broadcasters considered the depictions of Middle Eastern mysticism too intense for children's programming. Religious pressure groups demanded edits claiming it distorted spiritual imagery. Behind the curtain, the creative team faced turmoil. Voice actor Barney Phillips recalled re-recording entire scenes after the network complained that Shazzan sounded too intimidating. Animators struggled to convey scale without proper funding, leading to bizarre perspective shifts where the genie's size constantly changed mid-scene. Critics dismissed the show as visually inconsistent, yet decades later, animation scholars hailed it as an early precursor to cosmic fantasy. The show ended abruptly after one season, but its echo never faded. Its concept of ancient power awakened by youth foreshadowed later franchises like Masters of the Universe. Today, Shazzan stands as a forgotten experiment, a spell cast too early for its time. Its echoes remind us that imagination often burns brightest before the world is ready to see the light. Number 5. Young Samson and Goliath, 1967. Young Samson and Goliath was the perfect mix of myth and mutation. It followed a wandering teenager and his loyal dog who transformed into mighty warriors by touching mysterious bracelets. What began as another adventure cartoon soon revealed a darker allegory about transformation and identity. Samson's powers often came with loss of control, turning his gift into a curse. When the show premiered, it drew attention for its kinetic energy and dramatic tone, but it also sparked backlash. Critics felt the transformation scenes were too intense for children, while others complained about its recurring theme of punishment through power. Rumors spread that the network forced the studio to tone down fight scenes involving monsters after parents reported nightmares among young viewers. Production chaos was constant. Animators struggled to keep up with weekly deadlines. Background art was reused from other Hanna-Barbera shows, including Space Ghost, giving the world a hauntingly familiar look. Lead designer Alex Toth pushed for visual depth through shadow and scale, yet executives demanded simplicity to cut costs. The show was canceled after a brief run, but its memory lingered. Fans rediscovered it in the 90s, seeing it as a tragic tale about a hero who wanted peace but was doomed to violence. Samson and Goliath became the lost link between innocence and chaos, proof that even in the colorful world of cartoons, the burden of power could still break a soul. Number 4. The Fantastic Four, 1967. When Hanna-Barbera took on Marvel's Fantastic Four, it seemed destined for greatness. The legendary superhero team finally had their animated spotlight, yet the final product became one of the most controversial cartoons of its time. On the surface, it was heroic adventure. Beneath it was a clash between corporate control and creative passion. The show tried to balance cosmic action with the soap opera drama of the comics. But the studio's limited animation stripped away emotion, turning epic battles into stiff pantomime. Worse still, the network grew nervous about the darker tone of the scripts, which included existential threats and alien genocide. Several episodes were reworked to remove references to death and war. Behind the scenes, tension was constant. Marvel executives clashed with Hanna-Barbera's directors over tone and accuracy. Voice actors struggled with minimal direction, while writers were ordered to simplify dialogue for younger audiences. At one point, Stan Lee himself reportedly expressed frustration over the watered-down adaptation. Despite the turmoil, the show introduced countless children to the idea of superhero teams long before ensemble storytelling became the norm. Yet, by the early 70s, it vanished from television syndication due to rights disputes. The Fantastic Four cartoon remains a strange fossil, a relic of collaboration that burned bright, then vanished in smoke, leaving behind the question of what might have been if vision had conquered fear. Number 3. Sealab 2020, 1972. Sealab 2020 was unlike anything on Saturday morning television. It was not about superheroes in capes or magical powers, but about scientists living beneath the sea, working to save a planet already poisoned by pollution. In a decade obsessed with rockets and space, this show turned its gaze downward into the depths of the ocean. What it found there was both wonder and warning. Hanna-Barbera designed Sealab as an educational adventure meant to teach children about marine life and environmental awareness. But what emerged was a dark vision of humanity's future. Episodes dealt with oil spills, toxic waste, and greed. The tone was eerie calm, yet apocalyptic. Some parents complained that it was too serious for kids, while broadcasters worried it was too political. Behind the scenes, the show was ambitious, but cursed by budget limits. Animators reused backgrounds so heavily that characters often swam through still water. Yet this strange stillness gave Sealab a haunting atmosphere. Writers wanted to explore moral dilemmas rather than simple good versus evil. That decision doomed it in an era when networks wanted simple heroes, not scientists questioning mankind's future. Canceled after just 13 episodes, the show vanished from reruns. But decades later, it was reborn in parody form on Adult Swim as Sealab 2021, where its serious tone was turned into absurdist comedy. Ironically, that parody brought attention back to the original-making audiences, realized that in 1972, Hanna-Barbera had predicted the climate crisis with uncanny accuracy. Sealab 2020 remains a forgotten prophecy disguised as a cartoon. Number 2. The Mighty Heroes, 1966. Before superhero teams dominated the box office, Hanna-Barbera tested the idea with something bizarre, brilliant, and decades ahead of its time, The Mighty Heroes. On the surface, it was slapstick comedy. 5 oddball heroes, Strong Man, Tornado Man, Rope Man, Diaper Man, and Cuckoo Man, protecting the chaotic town of Good Haven. But beneath the silliness was an unexpected commentary on failure, insecurity, and teamwork in a world constantly falling apart. Each hero had powers that were as much curses as gifts. Strong Man was powerful but clumsy. Rope Man tangled himself into knots, and Tornado Man spun out of control whenever he panicked. The show quietly suggested that heroism wasn't about perfection, it was about trying again even when you looked ridiculous. But this subtext made network censors uneasy. They feared children might see superheroes as weak or unreliable, leading to heavy edits that removed darker comedic beats. Behind the scenes, the production was frantic. Ralph Bakshi, who later became one of animation's most controversial visionaries, pushed for surreal humor and abstract backgrounds. Executives pushed back, demanding something safe for Saturday mornings. The tension created a strange hybrid, a show that looked childish on the surface but hid avant-garde experimentation at its core. The Mighty Heroes aired briefly before vanishing from rotation. Some stations disliked its chaotic tone, others claimed it was too weird for young viewers. Yet decades later, animators praised it as a forgotten blueprint for flawed, self-aware heroes long before modern parody existed. Today, it survives as a strange relic, a superhero team born too early for an audience that wasn't ready to laugh at imperfection or see bravery inside a joke. Number 1. The Super Globetrotters, 1979. Of all Hanna-Barbera's experiments, none was stranger or braver than the Super Globetrotters. It took the real-life Harlem Globetrotters basketball team and reimagined them as costumed superheroes fighting. Villains with acrobatics and physics-defying stunts. What sounded absurd on paper turned into one of the most bizarrely creative shows of its time. Each player had unique powers from spinning tornado limbs to shape-shifting trick shots. The animation was colorful and chaotic, filled with psychedelic energy. But behind the laughter, there was something revolutionary. The show placed black heroes at the center of a children's cartoon during an era when television still resisted diversity. To some viewers, it was inspiring. To others, it was unsettling. Several Southern stations refused to air early episodes, claiming the concept would not appeal to local audiences. Hanna-Barbera executives quietly admitted that racial bias played a role in its limited distribution. Despite this, the studio stood firm, keeping the heroes proud, loud, and powerful. Yet the lack of promotion doomed it. Critics called it ridiculous, while fans saw it as joyful rebellion. Behind the scenes, voice actors worked with almost no direction, improvising dialogue that added charm and chaos. The music borrowed heavily from funk and disco, creating one of the most dynamic soundtracks in 70s animation. Though canceled quickly, its legacy endured, inspiring later shows that blended sports rhythm and heroism. The Super Globetrotters was not just a cartoon, it was a cultural miracle born from courage, laughter, and the will to be seen. These forgotten heroes did more than entertain. They warned, dreamed, and questioned long before the world caught up. They vanished from our screens, but not from imagination. Which of these lost legends deserves revival in today's world of endless reboots? Tell us below. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales from animation's strangest forgotten frontier.